We are live. Okay.
Yes.
So it appears that we are live. I don't think anybody is watching. We should know how many people are watching, right? People who know this. We are zero. That's
Sujato,
okay.
zero. Okay.
So let's wait for a few seconds. I know somebody. Oh, okay, there are already 5 people joined. Okay.
Five
Uh,
people.
5 people joined.
How
Okay.
can
Yeah,
you
that's
view these?
why are you
Exactly, because
so
আমিও দেখতে পাচ্ছি না।
so are you so inconfident? I know some of the people are. Anyways, welcome everybody. This is our brief amateur discussion on the partition of the Bengal province, of the partition of the Bengal province of 1947. And if the people who are not speaking at the moment could just turn their microphones off, that would be really nice.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. These were the words of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, which on the 14th, at midnight on 14th of August 1947, that's 73 years from now, had declared the birth of this nation where we are today, the Republic of India, the Dominion of India at that point, and also had effectively started the decolonization process of the British Empire with the loss of British South Asia to the British Crown, and created what it also is that it is the words that effectively cemented the creation of two separate nations of India and of Pakistan. At that point, West Pakistan and East Pakistan as two different territories. And so, oh, yeah, Sujato got excluded. Yeah. And so these are the two, as per the CIA and several different think tanks, which also engage with the world. And CIA is not exactly a think tank, but which engage with the world. After the Cold War, the conflict between India and Pakistan, born since 1947, is the most troubled conflict and the most hostile to countries that stand facing each other armed with nuclear weapons. And so what we would like to do in this taking this opportunity is also remember the 14th of August and the 15th of August as the day of partition, as the day when India was free, but the day also when British South Asia burned. And so we would like to have this discussion on board with this panel of 4 people. All of us are students who are associated with the Chronicling Resettlement project, which is a project to memorialize the partition of the Bengal province. And I will now hand over to my friend and colleague Atmadeep to discuss why are we here and what we are going to do exactly. So over to you, Atmadeep. Atmadeep, you didn't unmute.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry for that mistake. A very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you, Sagnik, for handing this over to me. A very warm welcome to everyone. Welcome to this discussion on the partition. We are here as co-workers of the Chronicling Resettlement project. Before I get into the nitty-gritties of this discussion, I shall be talking very briefly about what the Chronicling Resettlement project exactly entails. The Chronicling Resettlement project has been initiated by Sagnik, Isha, and me. And what we aim to do basically here is that we, as Sagnik has already said, we aim to memorialize the partition of Bengal, of specifically Bengal. We aim to focus on different aspects of the Bengal partition of 1947. And we have with us a team of very talented friends and interns, 2 of whom are here with us today, Sujato and Annesha. Both Sujato and Annesha have been working on various aspects of the partition, as Sagnik and I also are. We as a team, we are specifically focusing on the work, on the life and the works of the partition historian Prafulla Chakraborty. Prafulla Chakraborty is essentially one of the first one of the, not only the first, but one of the most seminal historians of the Bengal partition and the resettlement and the entire process of resettlement that follows this huge displacement that takes place following the partition, wherein people, especially Bengali Hindus, migrate from East Pakistan, erstwhile East Pakistan, today it's Bangladesh, to West Bengal from 1947. And he sort of documents this entire process. He goes into the nitty-gritties, into the very minute details of what exactly happened during this process of people migrating, to a different place, of people migrating, settling down, at least trying to settle down in West Bengal, and what the official policies of the government were, and what were the problems in those official policies, and what exactly those how exactly they manifested in the lives of these people. Sujato and Annesha have been involved in this project in various capacities. Annesha has been working on the rehabilitation project of Andaman. Sujato has been concentrating and researching on the area of Kolkata and some of Bengal, and we are publishing all our writings, our articles, in a blog that we are currently running, which we shall provide you in the comments. We have already been sharing our blog. If you are acquainted with our Facebook page timelines, we've been sharing that blog. It's titled Chronicling Resettlement, and we are doing this as a sort of a joint program with the Kolkata Partition Museum project. Apart from that, we are also trying to do various other things, and one of them is digitizing Prafulla Kumar Chakraborty's handwritten documents. But those are sort of the technical details of what we are doing. But one may ask me that why do we need to exactly talk about the partition now, and why specifically the Bengal partition today? Obviously, today is the day of partition, and but why specifically Bengal? To begin with, if you look at the broad way in which the historiography has progressed, if you look at the kind of policies that were adopted by the central government following towards the partition victims, we see a huge disparity between the partition of Bengal and the partition of Punjab. Okay, Annesha says that people can't join and watch this live. Okay, I see that there are at least 8 people here watching this thing. Is it not being broadcasted, Annesha? Probably post a public korte hobe, noile limited only to to friends. Acha dekhi, where is Sagnik? Any idea where Sagnik is? Just a minute, we are facing some problems. কিছুতেই ঢোকা যাচ্ছে না লাইভ সেশনটায়. Where is Sagnik? Just a minute.
Yeah,
we're very sorry for the delay.
My internet completely blew off.
এ বাবা, তো আবার পুরোটা প্রথম থেকে শুরু করতে হবে?
ঢুকতে হলো. No, that's fine because but people can't enter apparently.
হ্যাঁ, দেখি ব্রডকাস্ট হচ্ছে তো ব্রডকাস্ট.
Oh, okay, then it is happening.
It is happening, right?
It is happening. Okay. So so am I visible and audible?
We have no way to know actually. I have shared this thing, the link, and I see that 11 people are watching on the
11
Facebook.
people, 10 people are
stuck again.
Are watching. So if they are watching,
post a public kore de. Yes, you are audible, but your voice got cut. You're inaudible.
Post a public kora jaচ্ছে.
Public kore রেখেছে?
হ্যাঁ, post a public kora আছে. It is public post.
So I think I don't know where we lost track. So
Still
should I?
couldn't. Okay, somebody can't join. Okay, somebody else is joined. You are audible. Okay, no, then it is a problem with some people. I think that they can't join. They are not audible.
Content isn't available. Are baba re. Why is this happening?
Oh God.
So I think what we can do is share this link.
Which link?
দাঁড়া
Sagnik আবার কেটে গেল। Sagnik কোথায়?
পোস্টটা পাবলিকই আছে no I think some people who joined it some people who joined through your thing Atmadeep, that post might not have been public because my one is public.
Okay, wait. But I mean, they're my friends, so why should কি জানি? Okay.
For 9 people who are listening, and I know some people are because I got a few questions and stuff. So I think can we continue and try
Sagnik, your internet is constantly
should we
breaking.
continue with the
Okay, so my content is not available at the moment, as in on my this thing, on my timeline for some reason.
okay yeah see the comments on Facebook appটা দরকার না appটা দরকার নেই
Wait for hello.
yeah
হ্যালো হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ সাগ্নিক তোর ইন্টারনেটটা মাঝে মাঝে চলে যাচ্ছে মনে হয়
আমার ইয়েটা অফ ছিল মাইক্রোফোনটা
ও আচ্ছা আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে should we proceed কি করব
yeah I think we should proceed because some people can hear and some people can't if you miss out certain portions this is being recorded so we can upload it to YouTube and share the link again
yes
so I think we can do that so yeah where did we leave off
yeah I was speaking so I shall continue because I don't think it makes sense to rewind and go back
no
so
yeah sorry for the disturbance
yeah we're very sorry for the disturbance but coming back to what we were saying that there's been a very there's a pronounced difference between the partition of Bengal and the partition of Punjab and a very sort of simple difference if we can point it out is that when we were doing this project we were constantly searching for photos of the Bengal partition. Most of the photos, and later on, this was something that Rituparna Di, the initiator of the Kolkata Partition Museum project, later on actually verified. She's a partition scholar, so she verified. She told us that there are very few photos of the Bengal partition available. Most of the partition photos that we have available with ourselves are from the partition of Punjab. To add to that, if we sort of get into the nitty-gritties of the government policies, and I won't be getting into a lot of them because we have our friends are more well-versed in them, but just to sort of provide a very sort of simplistic view, they are very different. The government policies towards the partition refugees of Bengal and the partition refugees of Punjab are very different. A lot of attention was firstly provided from the beginning of the partition to the partition refugees of Punjab. That wasn't the case of Bengal, wherein Nehru and even B.C. Roy, the erstwhile chief minister of Bengal, believed that these refugees would probably return, and they believed that these refugees would probably return to East Pakistan, what is now Bangladesh. And a variety of such concerns actually led them to sort of deny this entire problem for a long time. And once they started actually accepting the problems, even then there wasn't a very there weren't very favorable solutions that were adopted. And the refugees were constantly sort of dispersed across, say, they were dispersed away from Kolkata, they were dispersed away from Bengal in many cases, which Annesha shall touch upon. And this entire process, this entire policy of that the government actually adopted towards the partition victims has been labeled very accurately by the historian Joya Chatterjee as one of denial and dispersal. And it is this denial and dispersal, it is this sort of not only denial, but this sort of constant lack of apathy, this content apathy towards these refugees that we are sort of premising our project on. This is not to say that we solely intend to criticize all the policies of the government or anything. No, that is not our purpose. What our purpose is that we want to take up different issues and different problems that the refugees faced, different realities of the partition that as it presented to the refugees, and we sort of want to bring it back into the public limelight. We sort of want to not only bring it back, but even unearth such insights into the public limelight, because many of these insights were are something that we have forgotten. Say, for example, the kind of displacement that the Muslims of Calcutta faced on the arrival of the partition refugees. Calcutta became, the Muslims sort of the city who were residing in the city for the past 100, 150, 200 years, suddenly started feeling very vulnerable, and this sort of led to their ghettoization. They started living in more concentrated spaces where there were only people from their community staying. In many cases, there were, if you look at the West Bengal Legislative Assembly proceedings of 1951, if I'm not mistaken, one MLA actually raises this point, saying that that in particular constituencies of Kolkata have been emptied of the members of the Muslim communities, and they have shifted either to say places where more of their people of the same faith reside, or even in many cases, many of them even left the city. And one of the most prominent people who comes to my mind who had left the city back then was Professor Anishuzzaman, who recently passed away. He was the national professor of Bangladesh, and he even received the Padma Shri in India. But to sort of come back to what we are saying, so this is what we aim to do at the 73rd sort of not anniversary, but the 73rd year of the partition. We sort of want to bring this back into the highlight
in some way.
Sort of want to bring this back into the highlight, into the public eye. And therefore what we shall try doing is that we want to sort of basically gain an idea of why this exactly took place. And I think Sagnik would help us, can provide us with a very good sort of insights into that. So Sagnik, over to you.
Thank you, Atmadeep. I sincerely hope my internet doesn't just blow off again. And if that happened, I'm going to scream. Okay, anyways. So what I wanted to do at this point is just, not go into the whole history of the partition thing. That's impossible, and people would just fall asleep. But what I would instead do is just highlight a few instances and highlight a few salient points about the partition of Bengal, which makes it slightly perhaps different from the partition of Punjab or Sindh, for that matter, and also affects in many ways how refugee resettlement and rehabilitation happened, or lack thereof. And for that, I'll take the help of a few maps. So if I can share my screen, which is, it is possible. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. So what we first need to remember with regard to the partition of the Bengal province is that Bengal was partitioned twice, and that is an important, very, very, very important fact that we need to always keep into account, that Bengal was partitioned twice. It's a twice partitioned province. And so for a certain population, definitely partition was not a new concept. Partition had happened before. Perhaps the exact same rhetoric was not the same, and it was a provincial partition at the end of the day. But partition, or this whole idea of a separate Muslim territorial entity and a separate Hindu territorial entity, is not something that is entirely new. And so I would, sorry, this is a repurposed presentation. So I would therefore draw your attention to the partition of 1905, which effectively kind of kickstarted the Indian freedom movement in a very different degree and a very different intensity. So you have what you see on this map. So you have, yeah, pointer. So what you have here is the eastern part of India. Familiar with the geography, the eastern bit of India, and you have this whole bit, which is the Bengal Presidency. This bit, and that is this, it's the Bengal Presidency. In many ways, officially the Bengal Presidency is this entire thing, which is an area which is under the official oversight of the Governor General of Bengal. But you have the Bengal Presidency here, and you have the Lower Bengal, which is the core Bengal region here. And in 1905, this region gets partitioned because the freedom movement or the nationalist aspirations are kind of reaching a peak in this point already. And you have the capital, which is here. Sorry, both the marker and the map is red, so I can't show, but the capital is in Bengal, right around the coast, and this is the city of Calcutta. And this whole politics that is happening, the new kind of bourgeois politics that is emerging, is based around Calcutta, is based in and around the city of Calcutta, which is the capital of British India at that point, the capital of India, effectively. At that point. And so the British government decides to, well, there are many different opinions on this, but generally decides to kind of play a divide and rule policy, and divides the province of the Presidency of Bengal, the Bengal Presidency, into two separate. The Bengal province, which is this, it was not officially called West Bengal at that point, but if you look at newspaper cuttings and in newspaper clippings, then the word Western Bengal does appear quite a few times, especially in the Amritabazar Patrika. And so this, you have this territory, and you have this entire territory of Eastern Bengal and Assam, which you see here in green. So there's, and this the division, if you plot, has also been done on a religious basis. The proof of that is in this map. This map is from Chatterjee's book, and this actually plots the Hindu and Muslim population. So this is the Muslim population of each of the districts. And if you see, I don't think this map is very clearly visible here, but this map is very close to this, what you have here. And so what makes it different from the Punjab province is that for Punjab, this whole partition, this whole entire idea of territorial partition was a new thing, whereas in Bengal it wasn't. And so when actual partition happened in 1947, the memory of a provincial partition had actually sustained in the memory. And a lot of people, even in our oral testimonies that we are gathering and we are looking through, and also the testimonies gathered by the University of the Stanford University and Harvard in their partition archive, 1947 archive, they have mentions that the partition they all thought was as the 1905 partition. So the people actually had a choice whether they wanted to move out of Eastern Bengal, or what was then East Pakistan, or where they were, because, you know, we have survived a partition, we have lived through a partition that was repealed. And there was also the hope in the very early days of partition that we have seen that partition would be annulled, as it was annulled in 1911 when the province of Bengal, which is this, which is basically what we will be dealing with, was born. So this entire thing was annulled. Both of them was kind of kept. And the appeal, the new rhetoric that emerged was that the Bengali-speaking territory that be kept together. This was the new kind of politics that emerges after 1911, 1912, that if you had to partition, because the idea was that this whole thing together was just too unwieldy, it was just too big, it could not be administered effectively, and there were kind of extreme differences between the two the two parts, which is Western Bengal, which was a much more hard-soiled region, and Eastern Bengal, which is a far more wet region. Bangladesh is still a much more wet region than West Bengal, and this map goes into the Chotnagpur Plateau, which is the plateau region, so it's quite a dry and hard region, Ghatshila and all those. And Eastern Bengal. So there are quite clear ontological differences between Eastern Bengal and Western Bengal, and the fact that it's just too big, it's unwieldy, and the fact that Kolkata or Calcutta is in this region, it completely dominates the whole narrative, the whole discourse of the Bengal province, and Eastern Bengal effectively suffers from marginalization, suffers from economic peripheralization. So these considerations were very dominant when discussing the partition of 1905. So therefore, the idea was that Bengal had to be divided. So the counter argument was that if it had to be divided, let's keep the Bengali speaking population together. And you have this bit, which is the Bengal province. So far, before that, it's the Bengal presidency. So now you have the Bengal province, and that's why we keep saying the partition of the Bengal province, because that's the partition of the Bengal presidency together. And there you have this. So a couple of new things have actually by now emerged. One is linguistic politics, that the Bengali speaking population be kept together. And this creates another trajectory, which is a kind of regional politics, which also emerges after the partition of Bengal. But what has also emerged because of this interregnum of 1905 and to 1911, because in this period, it functioned as two separate provinces. The partition was reality. You had a capital of Western Bengal and the capital of India established in Calcutta, and you had the capital of Eastern Bengal and Assam established in Dhaka. So you already have a new province, which is this province, but one province with two centers. You already have two centers. So this is the period when we kind of start seeing the Nawab of Dhaka getting more and more powerful. Salimullah getting more and more powerful, and there are provincial aspirations, and there are quite strong separate aspirations in Eastern Bengal already. So Dhaka University coming up. There's also a whole rhetoric now going around whether West Bengali intelligentsia was against Dhaka University. Well, some of them were yes. Rabindranath, no, but some of them were yes. So they generally start feeling that Calcutta is losing its hegemony over the Bengal province, and that is another major dimension when we are discussing the Bengal province and the partition of Bengal is that it's entirely a very suburban affair. The violence, the etc., they're all very strongly suburban affair. Joya Chatterjee in her book Bengal Divided actually has a chapter dedicated to this affair called The Rise of the Mafusils. Mafusil is the suburban territories, and what she begins this chapter by saying, no other city in India dominates its hinterland so completely as Calcutta dominates Bengal. It still does dominate Bengal in quite the same way. And this period, this 1905 to 1911, is a point when this domination is being challenged. Dhaka and Eastern Bengal and Eastern Bengali culture is emerging as a counterexample and a counter argument to the West Bengali hegemony. And so you already have tensions that are building in this period. So what's important to remember are a couple of things: that Bengal was already a partition province. It was repealed and reunited, fine, but it's still, there's some rupture that already exists there. And the second thing is that partition is not a new thing for Bengal. And another thing, that strong regionalism is also developing in Bengal. It might be West Bengali versus East Bengali regionalism, but it is also a strong kind of Bengali regionalism, because when the Government of India Act gets passed in 1935, Bengal is one of the very few provinces, if I'm not wrong, the only one, that actually manages to get an Indian native language passed as an official language, which causes reform in the Bengali language and the standardization of the Bengali language in 1937, spearheaded by the Calcutta University, and where Rajshekhar Basu comes up with Cholantika and stuff like that, the dictionary. Because if you're using it for administrative purposes, you need to have a standard language. No other province actually manages to get it passed, because all other territories have multiple languages. So Bengal is already a province that is shaped on linguistic basis. Yeah, so linguistic basis is already shaping this province together, and that will become important towards the end of this whole affair. So you have the Government of India Act gets passed, provincial autonomy, provincial governments on the basis of elected representation, kind of almost for the first time in 1935, elections in 37, and a strong federal structure. So what that was one of the main tenets of the Government of India Act of 1935, also called the Constitution of 1935, is that it would be a very strongly federal structure. And it tried to limit the powers of the imperial government. So defense, finance, communication, war, and foreign affairs were effectively the only affairs that were managed by the imperial government. The rest was left to the provincial administration, and had a complete Congress victory. 11 versus 6. So 11 provinces the Congress won, 6 provinces the Muslim League won. And Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the founder of the Muslim League, at this point effectively gets an almost a wake-up call, because he realizes that he doesn't really have a basis for his claim that all Muslims support him, because he has not really done a great job in winning elections. And even where there are Muslim majority provinces, for example, Bengal was a Muslim majority province, they only won with the help of local parties, for example, the Kisan Praja Party and other parties that supported the Muslim League, because they had problems with the Congress. The Congress was always on the side of the zamindar, so the landed gentry, whereas the Kisan Praja Party, which is the farmers' party, the peasants' party, was kind of feeling alienated from the Congress because the Congress kept blocking land reform legislation. And so they supported the Muslim League. And this is Jinnah's wake-up call, and he realizes that he can never effectively defeat the Congress in open election unless he has a very strong federal structure where only Muslims can vote in Muslim majority constituencies. And that's when the demand kind of starts. And Bengal is, of course, a Muslim majority province, so it becomes rather aggressive in Bengal, this whole idea. So you have Jinnah's fears, and also you have Nehru's conviction that India should be a very strong union, because Nehru at this point was kind of influenced by Soviet ideas, and he also realized the importance of national level planning for economic rejuvenation. So he had strong convictions of a union, but Jinnah knows that if it's a union, then the Muslims are never going to win elections, because Hindus are too far and in a majority, and the Muslims are too thinly spread across the country. And so the question of reservations appear, that should we have reservations for Muslims? So Muslim majority constituencies should only have Muslim candidates, and should only be able to vote for Muslim candidates. And eventually this escalates into the demand for a new state. Whether Jinnah actually believed he will get a new state is actually a matter of debate. Some theorists claim that Jinnah, for him, it was just kind of a bargaining chip that just materialized. But what's important to realize is that Bengal had alternatives. There was something called the United Bengal Resolution, which was tabled early in 1947. So that's pretty late, actually, if you think about it. The Bengal had the United Bengal Resolution, which basically posited that Bengal, all of Bengal, be kept as a separate state. So instead of having 2 states, India and Pakistan, we have 3 states. So Pakistan, if Punjab, they want to be divided, they can be. We don't bother about it. The rest of India, and we have Bengal as a separate state. And Bengal can decide its own terms of relations with the rest of India and with the British Commonwealth, because at this point we are only talking about the Dominion, by the way. And Bengal can also decide what our foreign relations are going to be. And it was supposed to be based on that idea of federalism and reservation, that Muslims will vote for Muslim constituencies. So it was agreed that there would be a 30-member legislative assembly, 16 Muslim members, 14 Hindu members. There would be a prime minister and a president, which would rotate between a Hindu and a Muslim. And the territorial divisions were even chalked out. They were done in such a way that the Hindus and Muslims are almost in the 50-50 majority, 50-50 division. And so Jinnah's worst fear that the Muslims would eternally be in a minority doesn't really materialize. And Jinnah actually frankly agreed to it. And even there are some indications that Nehru and Gandhi and even the British were fine with it. But eventually it didn't work out. And the main reason for that is the role of big capital, is because a lot of Western Indian firms had their firm bases in Bengal, because Calcutta still is the largest port of India, in terms of volume traded, and at that point it was by far the largest port, and Calcutta was the main economic center of India. Bombay was emerging, yes, but Calcutta was still the old traditional one. And that would mean that the homeland for this capital and the place where it is being invested would become in two different countries. So a lot of big capital propaganda and machinery went into it, in seeing that the Unity Bengal resolution never really succeeded. For the Hindu Mahasabha actively promoted against it. The RSS actively spoke against it, and eventually at some point even Gandhi turned against it. The main people who withdrew the support, the main person who was kind of in favor of it originally, but with his loss of support, the whole thing collapsed, was Sharat Chandra Bose, the relative of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, the freedom fighter, and Sharat Chandra Bose, in tandem with the then Prime Minister of Bengal, Suravardi. Hussain Shahid Suravardi, who was then Prime Minister, he was a Muslim League member, and they effectively formed this theory that we should have a United Bengal resolution, but it was then promoted as a Muslim plot to keep Muslim League control over Bengal, and so it eventually Sharat Chandra Bose withdrew his support, and it never really materialized. Why I put the role of Syama Prasad Mukherjee here is because Syama Prasad Mukherjee, at that point in the Jansang actively spoke against it. Is nowadays being trumpeted as the person for whom Bengal is in India. He's the progenitor of West Bengal and stuff like that. That's kind of half true, actually. The point is that Syama Prasad Mukherjee was instrumental in getting the United Bengal resolution defeated. So is he the progenitor of why West Bengal is in India? Probably yes, because otherwise it would be a different country. Might be. We don't know for sure, of course. But is he actually the person responsible for keeping India from going into keeping West Bengal from going to Pakistan? Well, no, not really, not exactly. So that is not a correct point, by the way. So it was settled that Bengal would be divided because the legislators from Western Bengal met in a separate assembly, and the legislator from Eastern Bengal met in a separate assembly, and Eastern Bengal decided to join the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan, and Western Bengal decided to join the Constituent Assembly of India. The legislators sent delegates, I mean. And so partition was a settled fact again, and partition was settled. But what is important here, and connecting to my previous point, is to realize that Eastern Bengal and Western Bengali delegates met in separate assemblies and voted separately. The fact that they're still identifying as Eastern Bengali and Western Bengali delegates, although there's just one Bengal at this point, is proof that Bengal is a partitioned province. Bengal, although it's a single province, it is still a partition. It is ontologically still a partitioned province. There's nothing that is stopping this consciousness of Bengal being divided. So the idea that Bengal is already divided is already there. I mean, it's nothing, it's a fait accompli. But the problem here emerges is that if you see this map, you will see where the riots took place. Most of the riots took place, and yeah, I'm sorry, I had a focus on Bengal, so this part is not there. But massive riots took place in Punjab and Sindh. Massive, absolutely massive, and most violent, largely because Punjab sent the most number of soldiers to the Second World War, the Indian effort for the Second World War. And when they came back after 1945, most of them had their weapons. So it was a very weaponized rioting that happened in Punjab, which was not so much the case in Bengal. You see some rioting, some rioting around Calcutta, you see some rioting around Dhaka, but otherwise Bengal is relatively, it's very cynical to say, but relatively calm. If you see the Great Calcutta killings of 1946, yes, of course, they are horrible, gory, but there a lot of people, 3,000 people die or something. But the other riots, if you see Noakhali, very important, mainly because Gandhiji went there. But if you see absolute numbers, it's very cynical to do that, but as historians you get cynical actually over time. If you see absolute numbers, it's not that as large as Punjab was seeing on almost a daily basis. And so people in Bengal after the partition had a real choice, had an actual choice. Should we stay or should we go? Do we keep put and just think that, okay, it's just going to be like the old partition? It's just going to be like the old partition. We can still move between Pakistan and India, and things are going to be fine. Or do we just leave everything and just run to the right side of the border, which in this case is the left side of the border? Do we do that? So what do we do? There was an actual choice. In Punjab, the choice was very narrow, actually. And I can't say that there was no choice. I mean, there is, of course, there were, and there still are Hindus in Pakistan. But the idea is for Bengal, there was an actual choice, and people never really thought, they didn't understand, they didn't fathom the difference between a provincial border, which we see here, and an international border, and what implications that brings. Because we have to remember that a border, a national border, nation state, these are particularly European concepts. They didn't exactly exist in that same sense in India, and especially for villages and stuff, it didn't really exist that strongly. And so they didn't realize that they would never be able to go back to their territory for years and years. I mean, we found testimonies of people who migrated in 61 or something like that, and they half of the family came because they thought, oh, we will go back and bring the rest of the half of the family with the property and stuff like that. But they never got a visa to again visit East Pakistan, because 65 riots break out. 65 after 64 Borishal riots, the situation completely deteriorates, and there's no going back, absolutely. So nobody realized that it's going to be this devastating, and so a lot of people stayed put. And that brings us to the main problem, at the beginning of the main problem, which is also exacerbated by this, is that if you see this map, you will realize that Muslims and Hindus are not that spatially segregated. Yeah, it's always a question of degrees. I mean, Bogra, this place has the highest number of Muslims, 81 to 100%.
Sagnik, your voice is breaking.
Okay, I'll speak slowly. So you have Bogra, which is in this part, where you have a very high percentage of Muslims, but otherwise most territories have fairly 50% or something like that around Muslims. So it's really difficult. It eventually was really difficult to segregate properly which parts would go to India and which parts should go to Pakistan. And in this map, you see one other alternative of how it should have been if it was perfectly divided by religion. So all of this would have been, this goes perfectly aligns with this map. All of this would have been East Pakistan, and the pink part would have been India. And these Coach Bihar and Tripura, these were princely states, so they were autonomously ruled. So they could join whichever side. I mean, most of them were Hindu majority, so they would join India eventually. So you have, so for these two reasons, one is because they couldn't really fathom what this internet would mean, and because there was not enough violence, not enough violent violence, that forced a lot of people to stay back. And the second was, nobody exactly knew what the border is going to be, or how the border is going to be like, or what this whole thing is going to be, because everything was in a flux, in a real flux. And so a lot of people did not move. They stayed put. And so the difference between Bengal and Punjab is that when the migration from Punjab stops, the migration from Bengal begins, in a way. Okay. The migration from Punjab kind of almost stopped 50, 51, 52. It's almost stopped. I mean, there were, of course, people coming in, but, large-scale migration. Large-scale migration picked off in the 50s for Bengal, because micro-violences, not being able to enroll in schools, not FIRs, first information report, police reports not being registered for Hindus. So structural violence, micro-violence against Hindus started propping up in East Pakistan and continues throughout the 50s, kind of rises in the 60s, and eventually culminates in the Bangladesh Liberation War, 69 to 71. That is just absolutely devastating. So these are some of the salient points that we wanted to mention with regard to the partition of the Bengal province. And yeah, I'm back. So these were some of the salient points that I wanted to mention with regard to the partition of the Bengal province, and why it is different from Punjab. Mainly because migration, the entire story of migration is different. They actually had a choice. They didn't understand what the border meant. And we found quite a few interesting bits, actually. In our research blog, if anybody has been following the Chronicling Resettlement research blog, the last post that was up by Bhattacharya, one of our interns, she interviewed one of her neighbors that she knew for a very long time, Miss Shantilata Bishas, Shantilata Shortkan now. And what we knew, I never knew that was even a case, is that they actually traveled back to Pakistan periodically to complete school, and then they came back to India again. Eventually, it was not possible because every time they went from this part to that part, there was a massive violence that happened because the trains were searched, people were just pushed into trains, and a lot of searching happened, and stealing and looting happened. So eventually that had to stop. But there was, even after partition, that means that there was certain permeabilities between the two borders. So that is something that is that we learned was new. So I think I've spoken for a very long period of time. So I think I'll give it over to Atmadeep, who can discuss in a few points what the resettlement meant and what are we doing in this whole thing.
Yeah. So I think I've already spoken in length about what resettlement exactly meant during my very longish introduction, and I shall not be speaking too much about that because Sujato and Annesha have already been working on it on the blog, and we have their writings lined up, their articles lined up, and we shall be publishing them on our blog. So over to you, Sujato. And Sujato, could you please share some of your insights about your research on how this resettlement, how the refugees were coming into Kolkata, and how they were resettling in these places, in these suburban areas in and around Kolkata, and if you have any other insights about Bengal. Over to you, Sujato.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Clearly? Okay. Firstly, thank you, Atmadeep and Sagnik, for having me here and for guiding us throughout the internship. Also, many thanks to the Kolkata Partition Museum who have been helping us throughout the project as well. So, I think the point that you mentioned in your introduction, as to, and also Sagnik also discussed it, as to how people thought that there will be a time where they can just go back, like before, because the experience that they had in terms of the partition of the Bengal presidency was that it was a soft border, what we call a soft border. You can always travel across it, right? It's interesting to note that even the Communist Party of East Bengal at that time had the same stance. The Communist Party of East Bengal also thought that the partition was a temporary incident after which people would go back to their normal lives, which is why a terrible apathy actually regarding the Communist Party itself developed in the camps, in the refugee camps that they were working. So I think all of us know some of the camps like Cooper's camp or the areas around it where I have worked, I have written about it, the Mohila camp, the Rupos Tripoli, which was under Controller C.R. Das. These camps were actually in pretty desolate conditions. Tuberculosis was one of the diseases which was rampant among the inhabitants of the camps, and also other issues were there regarding their cash doles not reaching on time and rations not reaching on time. So the formulation of the government, both actually what happened was there has been a shift. There was kind of a shuttling. Central government took over, as far as I remember, on 22nd of March 1950, and then it was again given to the state government on 1st of July, I think, 1951. So there's this shuttling that happened regarding who takes charge of the administration of the camps. And even then, the formulations of the government to actually close down the services in the camps and rehabilitate people elsewhere had started. We can also get this in quite a lot of reports. The government actually, after a certain point of time, particularly when we are slowly arriving at 1961, the time when the Dandakarana project is more or less established, at that time the government's plan was to shut down all camps by July 1959 in West Bengal, and out of around 45,000 inhabitants, they planned to rehabilitate around 10,000 in Bengal and 35,000 in the adjoining areas of Bengal, right? One of the arguments that the government was advancing was that we do not have any land, though that is not quite correct because the government still had some acres of land which was lying fallow and there was not cultivation which was happening. So what did people start doing, right? So people, often the refugee colonies, a lot of South Kolkata, like what we have today, even parts of what is today labeled as the East Kolkata township, areas like even areas like Panchannagram or near Jadavpur, the Chittaranjan colony. These are colonies. These were made up by refugees, but the problem is that they were occupied. They were people's refugees squatted on those colonies, on those areas. They were not legal occupation for a long time. Even under the present government, the present state government that we have, there have been granting of legal rights of occupation to certain groups of refugees in certain areas, if you see. So that was a long process. It, of course, accelerated after Left Front came to power, because that is the voter base they were also mobilizing, because they were involved in mobilizing the refugees for a long time. Hence, when I was also going through the interviews, it's quite interesting how people squatted and set up these areas. Because what people did was they went ahead and they occupied these areas. At that time, these were all what we call kacha baris. There were no cemented concrete buildings at that time, and most of these were marshy areas, which is particularly important. So, day after day, hour after hour, we have young men who are tying the end of their trousers, because otherwise they will have leeches which will climb up and suck blood. They are working. They're working under elder people, or they're working under people, or political administrators that they know, and clearing out, let's say, the marsh. They're what we call reclaiming the land in order to build the housing, in order to build hospitable area for residents. And this is actually quite a long process. I think not a lot of places had a lot of advantages. Bijoygarh, yes, Bijoygarh acted as the epicenter of the colonies which grew up in South Calcutta, let's say Netaji Nagar colonies and colonies like this. The point is simple. Bijoygarh acted as a military barrack during the Second World War, as a military center, so it had some kind of a rudimentary infrastructure around which one could build. Hence, we see that colonies are being built like this. For example, Ponchannogram colony is there, which I have written about, and people will read about it as well. Ponchannogram colony is there, Chittaranjan colony is there, and what happened particularly in Netaji Nagar colony is that there was, in all these colonies, colony committees were set up who looked after how the administration was conducted, how the daily life was there, what kind of cleanliness measures. And it's actually interesting that today we have this number of awards for who gets the best pujo, who is the most decorated pujo. These are actually not new things, but these are things which started long back. There were awards which the colony committee gave, that who could keep their neighborhood cleanest. If we see this in a very academic sense of the word, this is practically inducing governmentality into people. Like, take administration into your own hands, administer your own colonies. And a lot of cases, this, for example, if when thieves were caught, they were violently beaten up, and Manoj Rai in fact writes about it in his account of the Netaji Nagar colony.
Sujato,
So this,
if I may interject,
Sure.
this is the introduction of a certain kind of civil society when the so-called Bhadralok looks at the government to clean up any dirt in
Right.
front of their homes. Yeah,
Absolutely,
sorry.
absolutely. Yes. Also, since Shagnika mentioned Bhadralok and this connotation comes up, it's actually quite interesting to note that even for people who had lost everything, they have not forgotten the differences between them, differences within them. Because in Netaji Nagar even, the wards were distributed in such a manner. There were different wards, like we have wards, ward number 44, like my area in Salt Lake is ward number 44, composed of a few other blocks. So there were a few wards. And Netaji Nagar, actually only ward 7 and ward 8 were reserved for the poor people, were reserved for people who did not receive that kind of education. All the other wards were inhabited by people who came from respectable, educated backgrounds and were middle class people. It's actually interesting how that difference also permeated. And these colony committees charged a particular fee. For example, in Netaji Nagar, it was rupees 15. You could pay the colony committee fee and then come and live in the area. What is also particularly interesting is how this whole thing panned out. Arthalita, you mentioned the situation of denial and dispersal. If we if we go, it's actually very true. But because if we go into the nitty-gritties and the nuances of the whole thing, we will see that, as I mentioned, so there developed an apathy towards the communists and the Communist Party as a whole. So Congress naturally was the one, Congress activists were the one who were working. But as we all know, that for a long time the Communist Party, both the divided Communist Party and the undivided Communist Party, were master strategists at the end of the day, as any left party should have and had as well. They did not take the name of their party. For example, Binoy Mojumdar spent days in camps as activist, but he did not mention to anyone that he was a part of the Communist Party. He stayed undercover and he worked. But a deadlock was reached. When was this deadlock reached? This deadlock was reached when the government was saying that we are going to send you out of West Bengal, and the agitation started that we are going to stay in West Bengal. The slogan was "Lathi khabo, guli khabo, Banglar baire jabo." That we will have sticks and bullets, but we will not leave Bengal. Uh, but the government was quite indifferent. At this point, the leftists realized that if only they limit themselves to the colony committees, there is not going to be any space for progress, in any space for advancement of the rehabilitation struggles that were occurring. So what they did was particularly interesting. They created one coordination committee, which was the job of which was coordinating all the colony committees that were there. So in this point, yet they have not mentioned the name of that they are part of the Communist Party yet, because that is something which is still not allayed. People still retain those fears, those apathies. So what happens is, at one meeting, there is just this slight inclination and slight mention that now we must take to agitation, because before this, the typical this might sound at times very politically incorrect, but the typical very what can I say, a very confident Congress attitude that okay, government will listen to us because we are there. It's a very honest government. This was there, but the moment this was mentioned that okay, now we need to agitate, there was a ruckus in that meeting, and that person was immediately branded as a communist. That you are a communist and you are trying to do this. So what was the way? Naturally, there had to be a way. At that time, Amritalal Chatterjee was the president, one of the first starting presidents of the what we call the Nikhil Bongo Bostuhara Karma Parishad. It is the All Bengal Refuge Council of Action. So he said that I am going to take a petition, and he was very confident about the whole thing, that he is going to take a petition and go to Delhi, give it to the central government administration, and they will listen to him. So he went. He gave the memorandum to Nehru, but Nehru said that I have already received Dr. B.C. Roy's memorandum, and the issue has been given, ironic, the issue has been given to the Foreign Affairs Department. Why is this particularly interesting to me, and it's something I have worked on, is that if we see that the Indian government spent some substantial resources and some substantial capital in relocating certain women or men and women who were stuck in Pakistan to India. They did that. Often these women had formed connections, newer connections after the riots in newer families of other religions, but they were again relocated, and similarly Muslim men and women were relocated to Pakistan. So there is this very interesting dichotomy. At some point there are these half citizens. I mean, on one hand, the Indian state is saying that we must bring them there because they're Indian, but on the other hand, this is being given to the Foreign Affairs Department. So this is the framework in which the refugees are struggling. This is the framework in which they're trying to recover land as such. If you see the Ponchannogram, I think 121 families came to Ponchannogram, and these are all parts of struggle. As for example, in the interviews that we had that Prafulla Chakraborty takes, Gaurango Das, Jatin Saha, they were all organizers. They were frontline organizers. They mentioned this. Also their involvement in the Trump movement, and so they are slowly making demands, and they are gaining some concessions, and they're proceeding accordingly. For example, once there was a demand of, at the beginning the camps had tents. There was not yet the proper developed hospital, or the hospital was not yet accessible to all the people. So the camps had tents. And then there was hospital. Then there was a demand for increase of beds in the hospital. And slowly and steadily these things were slowly gained, some as concessions, and so slowly built up as well. So that is the thing that I have also worked on, and I think the final point that I would like to mention here is that uh, there's a division which occurs, and the left front comes to power. Uh, but the left front, in often cases, the allegation is that they did not take enough measures for the refugees themselves. So when the left front brings back the panchayat elections and the left front wins, gains the victory in the panchayat elections, something which Dutta Shankar Rai could not do, they write on the walls that panchayat ke ostro koro council লড়াইয়ের জন্য. So make panchayat your weapon for fighting for the councils. There was actually a call by the Communist Party of India to boycott those elections. And from a place where the average turnout was 90%, around 16% was the turnout which voted in that particular election. And so I think, so when we study this history, these stories of people, we find people who are not only think that they have lost everything, but they are losing everything as well. Every day they are suffering new identity crises. They are suffering new fluxes as to who we are. I think, Atulida, you know, regarding your own work, I think when Horo Prasad says in Ritik Ghatak Suvarno Rekha, who are we? We are at the end of the day ethereal, we are temporal. I am both.
Hello, Sujato, are you there?
What? Yeah, really sorry. Yeah, I think that is what captures the image of the refugee in that point, and that's what I have to say. Sorry for that. I went on for quite long, actually, but yeah, that is what we have been working on. It's particularly interesting. The interviews, if one listens to it with some due time, there's some very interesting insights that one gains regarding what the demands of the refugees were, what the responses were from the other side, and how they assimilated. And this was, as all interactions are, a very dialectical interaction. It went two ways, right? How the common people saw them and how they saw it. So yeah, that's what I have been working on. Insights.
Thank you, Sujato.
Yeah, just before next we'll go to Annesha, and we'll take Annesha's hand outside West Bengal. But before that, if I might add just a bit, is that we had posted the document of the proof of refugee registration of Miss Shanti Lata Bishas when she came to India, and there was I had posted a small bit of comment on that, is that how these refugees were defined by the state, by where they came from, kahan se aaye hai, kahan jaane wale hai, where they came from, where they are, and where they are going, which nobody knew. And the other important bit is their caste was recorded already, their religion and their caste was already recorded, which clearly helped the state in many ways in ascertaining which kind of camps they should go to. And what is also important is the particular, why I'm saying this, because Sujato already brought this up in a bit actually, is the parameter Grihokarta Nam, which is the name of a householder, which had to be a male person, a relative. So this was largely because, and after seeing that, I started thinking about it, and I was thinking what I've read on this and around, and it actually is poignant because what Urvashi Butalia's work informs us is that, of course, is that during the partition, the violence that happened, there was massive abduction of women and children that happened all around. And because of this abduction, it became effectively important for the state to know not only who is crossing the border, but with who is crossing the border. Because if we look at, because what Sujato was saying, that a lot of the state eventually went into the other territory and kind of salvaged and rescued people out of India for Pakistan, and also Pakistan from India, is that's mainly in the context of these minor children and women that had been abducted. 2 months after the partition, in I think November, the two governments met and agreed on a set of protocols and laws. If you do a kind of a detailed reading of the law, it's very interesting actually. It's miraculous, it's marvelous how it's worded in a way, because it states, I don't remember the exact wording, but it states that a minor male child, so a minor child who is male, or a woman of any age, they are two basically the same, if found cohabiting with a man of the other religion, would be assumed to be abducted. Okay, So first of all, there's no agency of either the child, which can be perhaps understandable because he's a minor, but also the woman of any age. If they are living with a person of the other religion, they would be assumed to have been abducted. They would be taken from there to a safe and secure government environment in a kind of a camp where they would be asked and questioned, and they would have to decide whether they want to remain with the family that had abducted them and perhaps even had children, or do they want to go and go back to their original country, which for Hindus particularly was extremely problematic because most of the families did not accept them back because they already lived with a Muslim man. So nobody was going to accept them. But what Urvashi Butalia did in her work is that she went through these government records and these case files. The woman's voice is nowhere recorded, what she said actually. So the whole idea is the three ideas of wealth: land, money, and women. They're the three kinds of wealth you have. So we have to protect them. And what Sujato was also saying in the end, that they are not only have lost everything, they are losing everything. So if you see the West Bengali perspective with the coming of the refugees, it's like we have lost our land because these refugees, the uncivilized people, they have come and settled here. So we have lost our land, we are losing our jobs, we will protect our women. And that created and still persists today a very strong divide in marriages, especially arranged marriages, that West Bengali families do not marry into East Bengali families. And still now, look at the matrimonial page of Anandabazar Patrika, they still have this identity of East Bengali or West Bengali. So this whole idea that we have lost land, we have lost our jobs, but we will zealously protect our women. This idea is so. With that, not related to women at all, we come to Annesha, who has worked quite a lot on refugee resettlement outside West Bengal, if I'm not wrong. And so if Annesha can enlighten us about her research and her experience with this.
Okay, so am I audible? I hope I am, right?
Yeah.
I would like to begin by saying that this internship has opened up various I think new domains for me in terms of gaining a bit of knowledge and learning a lot. What I have been essentially working on is refugee resettlement and rehabilitation, of course, outside West Bengal. Before two dominant refugee rehabilitation schemes did come up post partition. As far as rehabilitating East Bengali refugees in West Bengal was concerned. These were firstly the resettlement of refugees in the Andaman Islands, and the second was, of course, the Rondo Karanno scheme. I would primarily like to talk about the Andaman scheme here today, specifically because I have already worked on the Rondo Karanno scheme that I think would be coming out later in the article on the website. Let me just begin by saying that the main reason for why the West Bengal government was planning to kind of try and look for other places where they could rehabilitate refugees was because like Sujato already mentioned that they were talking about the fact that we don't have enough lands, we do not have lands to resettle these people. And also we have to remember that the state of West Bengal was essentially undergoing a sort of an economic lockdown of sorts. So because of the Calcutta riots and the Calcutta famine as well, so they were not able to economically kind of take responsibility for the refugees, which is why they decided in the first place that let's move them elsewhere, let's get them room elsewhere. So and the central government comes up with this idea that okay, fine, let's try and resettle the refugees in the Andaman Islands. Now one very interesting thing that struck me while I was doing this reading into this was basically the Andaman Islands have because of its long history with the exile of political prisoners and freedom fighters and rebels and etc. The Andaman Islands have been always thought of as the Bastille of the East, and this is a very important and a rather interesting term that I did come across. So, and if you now consider the idea that essentially the Indian government was thinking of rehabilitating refugees from East Bengal far somewhere far away into the Andaman Islands. So that entire idea of exile, it is I believe it is reinforced. So that is something that was really striking and that I really found interesting. What I would also like to talk about is that when I was going through the Prafulla Chakraborty interviews, there was this one particular interview that I was transcribing, and this was probably with a district revisionary officer called Naresh Ganguly at Port Blair. Mr. Ganguly, at the very beginning of the interview, he gives us this picture of how essentially refugees from East Bengal who were already in West Bengal were being transported to the Andamans. So these people would essentially be listed. There would be lists where they would write down the names of the members and the families, etc., etc. And they would then follow these lists, take these people according to the list. They would take these people up to the docks. Two special locations: the Outrang Ghat and also the Khidirpur dock. So they would take these people to these docks, and then they would load them onto jetties and ships and cargo, and then they would take them off to the Andaman Islands. And very interestingly, Mr. Ganguly, he mentions that once this happened once, that the number of people that they had written the names down in the lists, many of these people, it was found that several families were actually missing. So maybe some people did not want to, they were not willing to be rehabilitated or relocated to the Andamans. So there was this discrepancy with the list and the actual number of people present at the docks. And so what did the government try to do in this particular scenario? You have to remember that the refugees were desperate. They were desperate because they wanted to start afresh in a new land. They were desperate to earn a new livelihood. But at the same time, what I feel is the government was equally desperate to do away with the refugee crisis, to do away with the refugee problem. And so Mr. Ganguly says that they would, when they found that a few families were missing from the list, they would selectively, they would at random select people that they would find on the streets. So if somebody was found begging on the streets, and they would go up to that person, and even they would go up to squatters at the Shialda station. They would literally pick these people up at random, and they would ask them two questions. The first would be, are you an East Bengali refugee? Are you from East Bengal? So they would say, if they said yes, I am. And then the second question would be, do you want to be resettled at Andamans? So these are the two questions that they were being primarily asked. And and then people were so desperate that people would say, yes, please, I want to be resettled. And this is how they actually took people from all these places in Calcutta, in West Bengal, and took them over to the Andamans.
So the state is almost functioning like a life insurance company agent.
Precisely. That's what struck me as well. Yes. Precisely, yes. So that was happening. Another thing that I would like to talk about is when these people were being taken to these places like Dorno Karono and and the Andaman Islands. You have to remember that these areas were largely uninhabited. These were backward regions. These were backward regions, and the main motive of the central government was the idea that we would lose the refugees as as a potential source of labor power, as a potential source of manpower. So what they would essentially try and do is they would take these people, and you have to remember also that before 1950, the kind of refugees that were coming from East Bengal were mainly people who had a bit of capital, who had businesses back in East Bengal. They had a bit of capital, so when they came to West Bengal, they could use that capital or whatever professional or whatever kingship ties that they had, and they would utilize that to set up new lives here in this country. But 1950 onwards, what started happening was the character of refugees there was a mass change of sorts. So essentially, the refugees who are now coming from East Bengal into West Bengal were now these were mainly peasants, the Namasudra peasants mostly. So these people were expert agriculturalists. They knew how to they were experts in paddy cultivation, in all kinds of cultivation of sorts. So they were essentially farmers. So the central government finds that, okay, fine, these people are they can cultivate. So we have lots of fallow lands in Dondo Karonu. We have lots of uncultivated barren lands in Andaman. So why not shift these people there so that they can also help, in a sense they could help us develop those backward areas, and they would help us to start agriculture and industries in those lands. So that was a very I think a cunning policy that the central government at that point kind of tried to work out. Also, I believe this viewing refugees through the lens of national development also had a lot of problems. And one significant problem was that when these refugees were being sent over to the Andamans or Rondo Karono, a very prominent and major problem was that they almost always had a conflict of interest, a certain clash with the tribal indigenous people who are essentially living in these areas. So if we look at the Andamans, I have these two tribal indigenous people, the Jaroas of Andamans, and there's this other tribe called the Ongis. These people essentially they found that if this was a threat to their sense of livelihood, their sense of life, because when forests were being cleared for cultivation, when forests are being cleared for the setting up of industries, these people who are essentially hunter gatherers, or there's some kind of a nomadic tribe, they are essentially losing out on their sense of livelihood. And therefore this clash of interest it keeps on occurring. And it's I think this, while on the one hand, if you could look at the central government's rehabilitation scheme as being somewhat at least beneficial to the refugees from East Bengal, because they're getting to start a new life and a new fresh start. But these people, the tribal people in these regions, they are being effectively pushed to the periphery. They are being further dispossessed. They are being further marginalized, and that is something that I think I think this is another backdraw of this particular scheme. Because when these ideas were being developed, that we'll transport these people back to the Andamans, we'll transport these people to Londo Karono, you are not taking into account you're not essentially listening to the voices of these marginalized people who have already been staying there, people who have been staying there for generations, and you're just effectively sending settlers. This is almost a sort of a land colonization, as I view it. You're sending settlers to these areas, and you're not effectively thinking about what happens to the people who've already been staying there. So these a bit of these conflict of interest and these clashes do come up. Another thing that I would really like to talk about, that the Andaman settlements were not a complete failure. They were beneficial to a certain section of the people, and in that particular audio recording that I was referring to, this district revisionary officer, he talks about how these refugees, who were essentially very lower caste peasants from East Bengal, when they came to the Andamans, they were able to set up their agricultural farms and everything, and they had a good means of livelihood, and they were able to earn a lot, and they were able to provide for their families in a much better, and a sustainable life form did develop. And then he goes on to say that certain refugee families, and in fact he says, I think more than 60% of refugee families were the next generation of refugees. They were actually kids, or their children had grown up with a lot of education. Some had become engineers. They had gotten their degrees. And another very important thing that comes up is when we're talking about women refugees, or children, children and girl child and all of that. When these people came up to the Andamans, and previously when they were in East Bengal, these girls, as little as 6 years old or 7 years old, they would be married off, in their villages in East Bengal. But here, when they come to the Andamans, because of the flourishing of agriculture and industry, there have also been schools that have been opened up for these refugee children. And essentially what is then happening is these girls are now getting an education. They're at least getting a shot at education. So no longer are they getting married at the tender age of 6 or 7. So because they're getting to go to school, they're getting an education, they're also learning, their families are becoming aware, they are understanding the need for education, how education can essentially help you build a better sustainable life. And so nowadays, so immediately after coming to the Andamans and going to school and all of that, the girls are getting married at the ages of at ages of 10, at ages of 20 or 25. So I think that's a very prominent sort of development that does take place in the lives of these people. So these are some of the things that I have been very interested in, and I've been looking into when I've been researching about resettlement outside of West Bengal. So yeah, that's essentially what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Anusha.
Sagnik, if I
Yeah.
may add one small
Yeah.
thing, a very small insight to this conflict that happens with the local people. It's very interesting. The report of the committee which reviewed the rehabilitation works in the ex-camp sites, it mentions that in certain areas, particularly like Bijoli and areas like that, refugees reclaimed land which had been submerged for decades. But it was after they reclaimed the land that the locals came flooding in saying that it is our land that you have taken. There was no effort when the land was being reclaimed, which is why the report also makes an interesting mention. In certain cases, the report advises to let the refugees negotiate the prices of the land themselves with the land owners, and it's not completely one like white legal. In fact, in certain cases, in fact, the report advises that let the refugees settle now, let them occupy the place, the legal hassles can be dealt with in the long time. Secondly, in the present context, particularly regarding what happened on 5th of August 2020, when our head of state, like Prime Minister of India, comes and says that, okay, the Ram Mandir is actually a manifestation or a culmination of the project of nation making that was envisaged by my party. A very interesting parallel can be drawn. In Cooper's camp, there was a temple that needed to be built. And this was not like a temple in the similar connotations, but it was a temple that the people wanted there to be built to maintain their cultural interests and the interests that they had. And somehow, the government was cash stripped. So, Annesha mentions how these refugees were used as surplus labor to reclaim lands. It's interesting that when building this temple, D.N. Mistry was at that time administrator of that camp. He said that there is only one way we can get cheap labor, and in that way, Cooper's camp, a temple in Cooper's camp is not trouble at all. We can get bricks and stones available in abundance, and refugees are going to provide us cheap labor, and we are going to pay them with the cash dole that we are giving them right now. And that is how the temple was built, and Durga Pujos and Kali Pujos started happening there in Cooper's camp.
Yes, that is
Thank you.
an absolutely valid and interesting insight that Sujato added here. It's very clear that he has been working very diligently with the recordings and also the details from the Cooper's camp. So what we wanted to, we have kind of gone over time a lot by a very large number of minutes, but what we wanted to conclude with is what we are planning to do in this project. So the Chronicling Resettlement project actually was envisaged originally for just digitizing Prafulla Kumar Chakraborty's refugee politics research notes, which are at the International Institute for Social History in Amsterdam. But has, because of the coronavirus crisis and stuff, there had to be significant changes had to be made to the plans, because I had access to the files being in the Netherlands as a student at the University of Groningen, but I could not retrieve the files before I had to literally run for my life from Europe in 4 hours notice. And so I could not do that completely. We're still trying to, and the International Institute of Social History is also indefinitely closed at the moment because of the corona lockdown and the crisis. So we have changed this process a little bit. What we are going to do in the next stage is major work in mapping all these refugee camps in West Bengal. So the Cooper's camp, the Bijoygad colony, the camps and colonies, all of them, the official and unofficial, all of them, what we find from government reports and also Prafulla Chakraborty's work and the existing literature by Jaya Chatterjee, Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, etc., that exist in the academic literature. So we are going to be using GIS software and kind of and story map software using which we will be mapping all of these camps with details and pictures of the camps as and when and if available. The National Library of India has a number of pictures of these camps, which I think we can locate, because a lot of government departments were actually going constantly and clicking pictures and writing reports about these. So we will be doing all of that, and we will be attaching these interviews that these interns have been very diligently translating from Bengali into English and also transcribing to these nodes of on the map. So if you have a node on the Coopers camp, then you have also certain interviews, so personal testimonies of people who were there at the Coopers camp or who worked at the Coopers camp. So you can also get both a governmental perspective, which we get from the government reports. We are currently trying to locate all these government reports. We know they exist, we know their numbers, but we're trying to go around that, and which will give us data like how much money was going to the camp, how many people were there, when was it opened, when was it closed, etc. And also personal testimonies, so such as the ones collected by Prafulla Kumar Chakraborty. We believe this, if and when completed, this will be kind of a major digitized resource that can be used by people. It's easy to use, it would be user friendly, so a lot of people, even children, can technically access it and use it and kind of get an idea of how the refugee resettlement worked, because this was also interactive and a three-dimensional map, so we can also trace where people were going, what routes were people taking, what kind of train lines existed. So people who came on the trains from Khulna we also have attachment of interviews from on those train lines, what kind of trains were coming, etc. Where were people coming in, how many, which year. All of this can be nicely put in interactive maps. So that's our next step that we are going to take in this project, which we believe will significantly add to the existing material that exists, not just academic material, but the material, accessible material that exists regarding the refugee resettlement in post-partition and post-independence West Bengal. So with this, I conclude my part, and I would hand over to Atmadeep. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. I just want to bring something.
Yeah, I'm anyway handing it over to you. So if you could have a few concluding words, and maybe Sujato can join us. But Annesha might have some problem. She left, I think.
I think okay, yeah, she left, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you, Sagnik, and obviously I shall not bore people any longer, because I think they're sufficiently bored. We just have one question which I shall be addressing, and then we shall close for the day, which is that Shipra ma'am, our history teacher, has put on a question, which is that, was the fact that Bengali speaking people from one part of the subcontinent moving as refugees to another part of Bengal of any consolation to the refugees? I asked this in special reference to refugees of Dandakaranya, who suffered from an identity crisis in Madhya Pradesh, apart from physically being uprooted from their homelands. Of course, I mean, as far as my research goes, and I have been to some of the refugee camps that are situated outside West Bengal, and I have interacted with people there. One, to be very precise, but it was quite a memorable interaction that I had in a place in eastern Maharashtra called Vidarbha. What I realized was that definitely these people, and what Annesha's research points at, and even Sujato, I think, touched briefly on it, is that these people were not happy going out Bengal, and therefore they kept on trying to come back to Bengal. And as Sujato spoke about, I mean, the left-front government, when they tried coming back during the left-front government, they were trying to come back from 1968. There are instances of people coming back and settling down, I mean, flooding the Shialda platform back in 1940, in 1950, when they were forcefully removed from Shialda camp. So yes, they were not happy with these government decisions, and I think we have sufficiently dwelt upon it. So definitely, yes, it's a very it's very abysmal if we study this entire history, and that is what we don't want to make it sound like something that's bloody and gory or very depressing. But what we aim to do is, through this project, as Sagnik has mentioned, as we spoke about earlier, is that we're trying to bring out these complexities, these difficulties, these various issues through the project of Chronicling Resettlement, through our future projects, through our current project. And we hope to have you with us throughout this entire journey. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you so much for your help and support. And we hope to see you again on some other day. Thank you.
On some other live session, because what we plan is, as we proceed with the project, we can have some more discussions and stuff along these lines. So if you're all in favor of it or something, then we will love to know that, and we can have perhaps more such discussions. Yeah, and with that, I think we can say goodbye. Annesha has actually just joined, but anyways. And goodbye. Tomorrow is Independence Day, India's 73rd Independence Day. Happy Independence Day to everybody. Try to be happy about it. We took the limelight, perhaps from some of you, from listening to our president, the Honorable Ramnath Kovind ji's speech. So if you really missed that, then please do listen to it. Otherwise, we'll sign off here. So Sujato and Annesha, if you have any final words.
Not really, not much to add. But I am personally very glad that Shipra was tuning in, listening to this live. She is one of
Shipra,
the
listen to the
inspirational figures as to why I joined this. As to why I joined this field as such. So yeah, that's all I can add. And a lot of it was discussed. Everything else what we were doing in the project was discussed in detail. Particularly, Annesha offered some very crucial insights about, like, the most of the facts that I gave were from Bengal, but what was happening outside Bengal is also important, because that is what caused the agitation in Bengal for people to remain here, to stay rooted. So yeah, I hope everyone will keep following us and tuning into our discussions. The whole aim of this project is accessibility, how accessible we can make this history. So that's the point.
Yeah. Annesha, maybe a few words.
Yeah, I would just like to apologize firstly, because I just kind of my internet was not working. I had to kind of
we all have that
for a
problem.
while.
We are all having the problem.
So, but yeah, definitely, I think this was a very nice interactive session that we kind of conducted, and I hope people who have been listening it have also kind of enjoyed. And like Sujato mentioned, that we have been trying, the entire idea and the entire motive behind the project is to make the history of partition and refugee resettlement accessible to a wider public. Which is why, if you please, if you could go and look at the website where we are planning to also kind of publish the articles and the kind of documentation that we have been doing, and we're trying to make available tapes, the interviews, the transcriptions are available, will be available shortly, I believe. And I think, yeah, people can go, people who are interested, of course, they could go in, look into those archives, and I hope they also learn something, and they're able to further introspect and get a good view of things. So thank you.
Yeah, with that, we conclude this session. Happy Independence Day to all of you who have been listening from India or even outside India. And with that, good night, stay safe, and namaskar.
Right.